Today we will look at an intro to psychology, basically what psychologists do, the definition of psychology, and a few of the pioneers that predate the formal field of psychology, and then some famous psychologists that will follow. The definition of psychology is the science or study of behavior and mental processes. A behavior is an action, something that we can all observe and agree upon. For example, writing on your paper, walking across the room, blinking. All of those are actions that we can directly observe and record. A mental process, however, is something that's internal. It's something that we cannot directly observe because it is going on in someone's mind. This could be a dream, this could be a perception, a belief, an opinion, or some feeling that the person is experiencing. For your test on this chapter, you will find a few scenarios, and you will have to determine whether or not those scenarios relate to a behavior or a mental process. So let's try a few. First of all, Karen is bored. That would be a mental process. That is an emotion or feeling that only Karen would know. I could say, I believe Karen looks bored, but some people just have a certain expression and not represent exactly how they're feeling. In the second scenario, Bill forgot the meeting. Here again, this is a mental process. I could say that Bill was not at the meeting, but I really don't know why he was there. That is only something he would know. He could say that he forgot the meeting, but we, again, still don't know for sure. People lie. He may just have preferred to not go to the meeting, but said that he forgot it. Harry did not look me in the eyes when he spoke to me. That is a behavior. That is something that you can directly observe and record. Jill interrupted me 3 times. That also is a behavior. That is something that you can actually observe and record as well. Jane is sad today. That is a mental process. I could say Jane looks sad, or Jane told me she was sad, and that would be a behavior. But for me to assume that she is sad would be a mental process. That is a feeling that only she would know internally. Whenever we attempt to explain someone's behavior, asking why would someone do that, we look at 2 different factors for our explanation. First of all, a dispositional factor. This is internal. This would be accrediting someone's character or personality, saying that's just how they are. A situational factor is an external influence. This is an environmental influence, something external causing someone's behavior. So for example, if your friend passes you in the hallway and you look over and you wave at them and they seem to completely ignore you and keep walking, you can explain that behavior using dispositional and situational factors. First of all, you could say, wow, my friend is a jerk. She didn't even look at me. That would be her disposition. That is her character or personality. Or you could say, wow, something terrible must have happened to my friend because she didn't even recognize me or see me waving at her. She was in another world. That would be a situational factor. Something in the environment caused her to ignore you. Some of the earliest people to contemplate why people act the way they do in looking at human behavior were the ancient Greeks. 2 specifically that we need to mention. First of all, Plato. Plato was a nativist. Plato believed that we are born predisposed to act and think the way we do. Thus, nature influences our behavior and our actions. Aristotle, on the other hand, was an empiricist. He believed that it's our experiences that shape our behavior. So it's something that comes from our environment. Later, during the Renaissance period, we see two European philosophers who again rekindle this, what's known as the nature-nurture debate. René Descartes was a Frenchman who believed, just like Aristotle, that our ideas are inborn, that they're inherited. He too was a nativist, believing it's our genes that influence our behavior and our thoughts. John Locke was a British philosopher. He agreed with Aristotle. He was an empiricist, believing that it's our experiences that shape us and develop our actions and our thoughts. He even said that we are born a blank slate, and each experience that we encounter will shape our personality and our character. In the early 1800s, we see a British biologist playing a role in what is now the formal field of psychology. This would be Charles Darwin. Darwin, with his book Origin of the Species, Survival of the Fittest, really sparked this whole nature-nurture controversy, which plays a bigger role in who we become, in our behavior, in our thoughts. Is it our genes that we inherit, or is it our experience, our nurturing that comes from those around us? The person we accredit as the father of psychology is a man named Wilhelm Wundt. He was German, and he actually starts the formal field of psychology in 1879 in Leipzig, Germany. Wundt created the very first Psych laboratory. Wundt's assistant, his name was Titchener, and they were both structuralists. They looked at the structures of the mind. A technique that they used would be introspection or self-observation, recording your own thoughts and feelings. Wundt and Titchener focused more on the mental processes and not really looking at observational or behavioral factors. William James was an American psychologist who worked at Harvard. He was a functionalist. Wilhelm Wundt looked at the structures of the mind, but William James was more concerned with the function of those structures, the purpose behind them. James is well known for writing the very first psych textbook, which was called The Principles of Psychology. We will talk about William James in the future in this course. He had a lot of research in memory as well as emotion. A student of his, Mary Calkins, wanted to enroll in his class at Harvard and get her PhD in psychology. She was denied because this is an all-male school. However, being progressive for his day, William James allowed Mary Calkins to finish the psychology program. She did very well, but the board at Harvard still denied her PhD. However, she did become the very first female president of the American Psychological Association in 1905, which is still pretty impressive since women could not vote until 1920. The American Psychological Association is a very prominent association that has to approve any type of material to be entered into the field of psychology. G. Stanley Hall is also an American psychologist. In 1892, he created the first American psychological laboratory. He was also the first male president of the American Psychological Association. Many of you have probably heard of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian physician who then became a psychiatrist. He came up with what's called psychoanalysis in the early 1900s. Psychoanalysis is a perspective we'll be talking about in a later video. According to the psychoanalysis perspective, our thoughts and our actions come from unconscious or unconscious mind. So we're driven by thoughts that we're completely unaware of. A psychoanalyst also believes that childhood experiences influence our thoughts and our behavior. A technique that Freud used is called free association. This technique is still used today. If you've ever seen a show that had a psychiatrist, you probably watched Free Association. Free association involves a client saying whatever comes to their mind. The therapist will write down their responses and analyze it and tell them what's really going on, what are their issues that are causing their behavior that they may be unconsciously unaware of. They also use dream analysis, which we will talk about in a future chapter. Prior to the 1920s, Freud, Hall, James, Wundt, and Titchener, they all focused on the mental processes. It wasn't until the 1920s when John B. Watson came along and he thought, why are we focusing on someone's internal thoughts? People lie, and we really don't know what's going on. So why aren't we looking at behaviors, actions, things that we can directly observe? So in the 1920s, psychology took a shift. Watson starts what's called behaviorist movement, or behaviorism. And here, we will focus on, for the next 40 years, actions, things that we can directly observe, and moving away from the mental processes, the internal subjective side of psychology. We will talk about Watson in a future chapter on learning, but he is considered the father of behaviorism. And we will also talk about his assistant, Rosalie Rayner, in a future chapter. Ivan Pavlov was also a behaviorist. Pavlov coined what is called classical conditioning. We will focus on his classic experiment with classical conditioning when we get to the chapter on learning. Pavlov believed that we are conditioned to respond to certain stimuli that we've been exposed to over and over again. For example, when the bell rings at the end of your class period, you don't have to think, wonder what that bell means. You've been conditioned from the time you were very young to recognize when the bell rings, you just get up and you leave the classroom. Requires no thought. So it's a stimulus and a response. Another behaviorist, an American behaviorist, Ernst Frederick Skinner, or B.F. Skinner. He is another person that we will also talk about when we get to the chapter on learning. He came up with what is known as operant conditioning, looking at reward and punishment. According to operant conditioning, if you reward someone, a behavior will strengthen. If you punish them, it will diminish. And many of our behaviors that we exhibit are simply trying to avoid a punishment or get a reward. For example, you wear a seatbelt when you get in a car. One, to reward yourself by not flying through the windshield if you have an accident, or two, avoiding getting a ticket and having to pay a fine. In the 1960s, psychology takes another turn. Now we move back away from behaviorists and focus once again on the mental processes. This is known as humanism, or the humanistic perspective. which was pioneered by Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. During the beatnik or hippie movement in the 1960s and 1970s, we have a shift in society focused on emotions and feelings once more. And according to a humanist, we need to understand and accept ourselves and others without judgment. That brings us to the 1980s, which we have a conservative movement during Reagan's presidency. Here we combine the two and come up with the contemporary definition that we have today, that we focus on observable actions or behavior and internal subjective feelings, opinions, perceptions, dreams, etc., and look at the mental process as well. Another pioneer you may see on your test, Francis Cecil Sumner. He was the first black male to receive his PhD in psychology in 1920. Two female pioneers. First of all, Margaret Washburn here on the left. She was the first white woman to receive her PhD in psychology in 1931. And on the right, you see Inez Prosser in 1933. She was the first black female to receive her PhD in psychology.